Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of Kentucky. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. In the autumn of 1910, the residents of Harlan County, Kentucky began to notice something different about Eleanor McAllister. The widow, who had always been known for her impeccable appearance and sociable nature, had withdrawn into her large Victorian home on Maple Hill Road. The once pristine white paint had begun to peel, and the garden, which had won the county fair's blue ribbon 3 years running, fell into disarray. Neighbors reported that lights moved through the house at unusual hours, and Mrs. McAllister no longer attended Sunday service at the First Presbyterian Church, where she had once been a devoted member. According to county records, Eleanor McAllister's husband, Judge Thomas McAllister, had passed away in February of that year after serving 23 years on the bench. His funeral was attended by nearly everyone in Harlan and several prominent figures from Lexington. The widow appeared composed throughout the ceremony, as noted by several attendees. Mary Wilkins, who worked at the local apothecary, stated in an interview conducted in 1958, Mrs. McAllister stood straight as a rod at the funeral, not a tear, not a word, just that fixed stare. We all thought it was the shock. The house on Maple Hill Road had been built in 1887, shortly after Thomas McAllister was appointed to the bench. It stood apart from the other residences in the area, situated on nearly 2 acres of wooded land. The property backed up against an abandoned coal mining operation, though the main shaft entrance had been sealed off years before the McAllisters built their home. This isolation would later become a significant factor in the case that unfolded. For months after the judge's passing, Eleanor McAllister maintained her social obligations. She hosted the Ladies' Aid Society in March. She attended the Spring Festival in April. She was present at the wedding of Mayor Harrison's daughter in May. But by June, something had changed. Mrs. Clarence Porter, who lived on the adjacent property, reported hearing unusual sounds coming from the widow's home. When questioned further by Sheriff James McKinney, Mrs. Porter described them as scraping, like furniture being moved across floors, at all hours of the night. The first official record of concern appears in Sheriff McKinney's log, dated July 17, 1910. Paid call to Mrs. McAllister residence following reports of disturbance. The widow appeared disheveled but coherent. Claimed to be reorganizing late husband's belongings. House interior in disarray, but no signs of criminal activity. Widow refused further assistance. The local newspaper, the Harlan Daily Enterprise, made no mention of the widow during this period. However, ledgers from Blackwell's General Store show that her regular orders changed dramatically. Prior orders for coffee, flour, sugar, and occasional luxury items were replaced by unusual quantities of candles, lamp oil, and preserves. The delivery man, Ernest Blackwell, son of the proprietor, noted in his personal diary that was discovered during a 1962 renovation of the Blackwell family home. Mrs. McAllister won't open the door proper anymore, has me leave everything on the porch. Pays with envelopes of exact change slipped under the door. Saw her watching from upstairs window once. Didn't look right. By August, Eleanor McAllister had ceased all social interactions. Mail accumulated in her box until Postmaster Frederick Simmons took it upon himself to deliver it directly to her door. In a statement given to Sheriff McKinney, dated August 28, 1910, Simmons claimed that when he approached the house, he heard urgent whispering from within. When Mrs. McAllister finally answered his persistent knocking, she opened the door only a crack. Simmons stated her face was gaunt and her hair had gone completely white. She had been a handsome woman of 45, but now looked 20 years older. The smell from inside was musty, like old books left in a damp cellar. September brought the Harvest Festival, and Eleanor McAllister's absence was finally noted officially. As a major donor to community events and the widow of a respected judge, her failure to appear at the festival was recorded in the minutes of the town council meeting on September 15, 1910. Motion to send delegation to inquire after Mrs. McAllister's health approved unanimously. The delegation, consisting of Mayor Harrison, Dr. William Fletcher, and Reverend Abernathy, visited the McAllister residence on September 16th. Their collective report, preserved in the town archives, describes an unsettling scene. The property shows significant neglect. Approach to the house impeded by overgrown vegetation. No response to repeated knocking. Dr. Fletcher circled the premises and reported all curtains drawn, but observed movement within. Legal options for welfare intervention to be examined. It was around this time that the first rumors began to circulate through Harlan County. The cook at the Harrison household, Bertha James, reported overhearing the mayor tell his wife that the widow McAllister had lost her faculties and was digging in the walls of that house like there was gold hidden in them. This account was corroborated by the Harrisons' gardener, who claimed he heard Dr. Fletcher tell the mayor, "Something isn't right in that house." Not right at all. On October 3, 1910, Dr. Fletcher returned to the McAllister house alone, ostensibly to offer medical assistance. His medical journal, discovered during the settlement of his estate in 1932, contains a disturbing entry. Called upon E.M. today, gained entry after informing her of possible health ordinance violations. Interior of home in shocking condition. Walls in dining room and study partially dismantled. Floorboards in upstairs hallway removed. E.M. claims to be making improvements. Physical examination refused. Patient shows signs of significant weight loss, possible insomnia, and agitation. Offered sedative, which was declined. Legal intervention may be necessary, though family status complicates matters. The reference to family status likely alluded to Eleanor McAllister's connection to Governor Wilson's family through marriage. Judge McAllister had been the governor's cousin, a fact that afforded the widow certain protections from official scrutiny. Throughout October, several neighbors reported unusual activities at the McAllister house. Mrs. Porter claimed to hear hammering and drilling late into the night. The groundskeeper for the Presbyterian Church Cemetery, adjacent to the back of the McAllister property, reported seeing lights moving in the woods between the house and the old mine entrance. And most notably, the night watchman for the railroad, Clayton Miller, stated that on October 23rd he observed a figure that appeared to be Mrs. McAllister carrying a large bundle into the woods at approximately 2 a.m. Sheriff McKinney's log indicates that he interviewed Miller, but determined there was insufficient cause for a search of the property. The log entry ends with a cryptic note, "Judge's matters best left buried." What many in Harlan didn't know was that Judge McAllister's reputation had been built on more than just his legal acumen. According to courthouse records that were only unsealed in 1954, the judge had presided over several unusual cases that never appeared on the public docket. These cases, marked with a distinctive red wax seal, were stored separately from other court documents and dealt primarily with matters involving the region's mining operations. One such case, dated November 1903, concerned a dispute between the Black Mountain Coal Company and a group of miners who claimed to have discovered anomalous formations in a newly excavated tunnel. The miners' petition for investigation was denied, and the tunnel in question was sealed off by company order. Their names were redacted from the record, but the commitment order noted that all three men had worked in the same section of the Black Mountain mine and had begun exhibiting identical delusional behavior, characterized by persistent claims of hearing voices from within the earth and attempts to return to the deep shaft despite company prohibition. These cases might have remained nothing more than curious footnotes in the judge's career had it not been for what happened in October 1907. The judge's ruling cited concerns for public safety and prevention of unwarranted speculation regarding natural geological phenomena. Another sealed case from July 1905 involved the commitment of 3 miners to the Eastern Kentucky Asylum. The explosion at the Black Mountain Coal Company mine that killed 27 miners was, at the time, attributed to a methane gas buildup. Judge McAllister oversaw the investigation and issued the official report clearing the company of negligence. But according to notes found in the judge's personal files, recovered from a bank vault in Lexington in 1945, McAllister conducted a parallel unofficial investigation. These notes, written in a cramped, hurried hand, unlike the judge's normally meticulous penmanship, mentioned repeated visits to the mine site after hours, often accompanied by Dr. Fletcher. One entry, dated November 12, 1907, reads, "F confirms unusual properties of residue found near blast site, not consistent with methane explosion. Something else was present in the shaft, something that should not have been disturbed." A later entry, dated December 3, 1907, is even more cryptic. "Secured specimen from company officials. Remarkable preservation despite conditions. F advises extreme caution. Home laboratory prepared as discussed. Entrance via old exploratory shaft accessible through root cellar. Told E renovations related to dampness issues she must not know." The E referenced was presumably Eleanor, suggesting that whatever activities the judge was engaged in, he was concealing them from his wife. This deception apparently continued until his death in February 1910. The cause of death, listed on his certificate as heart failure, was called into question by a notation in Dr. Fletcher's medical journal, "T.M. death unexpected despite recent concerns. Symptoms inconsistent with cardiac episode. Rapid decline over 48 hours following return from final mine site visit. Unusual markings on hands and forearms noted during preparation of body. Family declined autopsy as per prior instruction." These revelations cast the subsequent behavior of Eleanor McAllister in a new light. What had she discovered after her husband's death? What secrets had been concealed in the walls and floors of their home? And what connection did it all have to the abandoned mine that ran beneath their property? The turning point came on November 7, 1910. Ernest Blackwell, making his weekly delivery to the McAllister house, reported hearing a sound like someone choking from within. When no one answered his knocking, he peered through a gap in the curtains of the front parlor window. His statement, given to Sheriff McKinney that same day, describes seeing the floor torn up completely and the walls stripped to the studs. There were piles of dirt on what furniture remained, as if the earth itself was being brought inside the house. What Blackwell didn't mention in his official statement, but later confided to his son, according to a family memoir published in a small local press run in 1979, was that he had seen writing on the exposed studs of the walls. The writing, which he described as like a child's scrawl but more desperate, consisted of the same phrase repeated over and over. He brought them home. Sheriff McKinney, accompanied by Dr. Fletcher and Reverend Abernathy, went to the McAllister residence immediately. Their subsequent actions are documented in the sheriff's official report. Upon receiving no response to repeated knocking and given credible concern for occupant safety, entry was forced through front door at 4:17 p.m. House interior found in state of extensive dismantlement. Walls, floors, ceilings partially removed throughout. Earth and debris covering surfaces. Smell of disturbed soil and decay present. No sign of Mrs. McAllister on main floor. The report continues. Upon ascending to second floor, noises heard from behind wall in master bedroom. Wall panel removed to reveal narrow passage in the space between walls. Passage appeared recently constructed. Following passage led to discovery of small room created in attic space, previously inaccessible through normal means. What they discovered in that hidden room has been the subject of much speculation over the decades. The official report, filed with the county clerk and subsequently restricted from public access in 1915, contains only a brief description. E. McAllister discovered in confined space with numerous documents, artifacts belonging to late husband, and evidence of excavation extending below house foundation. Subject in state of extreme distress and physical deterioration. Dr. Moore. Fletcher's medical journal provides slightly more detail. Patient found in self-constructed chamber, surrounded by dismantled wooden boxes bearing official court seals. Several journals belonging to the late judge scattered about. Most disturbing was the hole in the floor, which E.M. appears to have been excavating by hand. The hole extends downward at least 8 feet and appears to be following the course of an old mining exploratory shaft that predates the house. E.M. resisted removal and had to be sedated. What neither account mentions, but was later revealed in a letter from Reverend Abernathy to his superior in the Presbyterian hierarchy, was the state of Eleanor McAllister herself. The letter, discovered during a church archive reorganization in 1951, describes a woman transformed. Her hands were raw to the bone, the nails completely worn away as if she had been clawing at stone and earth for weeks without cessation. Her hair had been shorn close to the scalp in irregular patches, and there were marks upon her forearms, similar to those Dr. F. had described seeing on the judge's body before burial. But most disturbing was her speech, a continuous, barely coherent stream of allegations regarding her late husband's activities. She claimed he had been bringing things up from below for years, things that wore the faces he gave them, and now moved among the populace of Harlan undetected. When asked directly what she meant, she would only say, "They don't die like we do. They wait, in the walls, in the earth. They wait and listen and learn." Eleanor McAllister was removed from her home and taken to the Eastern Kentucky Asylum for the Insane in Lexington. Her admission records, partially preserved in the state archives, indicate a diagnosis of acute melancholia with delusional features. The attending physician noted, patient claims repeatedly that he is still down there and that the judge isn't finished yet, refuses to elaborate further. What happened in the immediate aftermath of Eleanor's removal from the McAllister house is documented in Sheriff McKinney's log. The entry for November 8, 1910, reads, "Returned to McAllister residence with Dr. F. and County Engineer H. Thompson to examine tunnel discovered in hidden room. Tunnel appears to connect with old mining exploratory shaft as suspected. Extends approximately 20 feet before reaching chamber of artificial construction. Chamber contains equipment of unknown purpose, including glass containers, electrical apparatus of unusual design, and surgical implements. Most containers empty, but residue suggests biological specimens were stored. One intact specimen observed appears to be organic matter preserved in solution. Dr. F. took possession for analysis. Engineer advises structural instability due to widow's excavations. Decision made to seal entrance pending further investigation." The log entry for the following day is equally intriguing. Dr. F. reports preliminary findings on specimen. Claims material is not consistent with known biological classifications. Recommends secured storage and consultation with university specialists. Specimen and related documents placed in county lockbox. Key retained personally as per established protocol for sensitive materials. The McAllister house remained vacant, the property falling into legal limbo as Eleanor had no children and Judge McAllister's relatives showed no interest in claiming the estate. In March 1911, a fire of undetermined origin destroyed much of the structure. The Harlan Daily Enterprise's front-page story on March 17, 1911, reported, "Blaze claims former judge's residence." Sheriff McKinney states no investigation planned. What the newspaper did not report, but was later revealed in a sworn affidavit by a former deputy who had been present at the scene, was that the fire appeared to have started in multiple locations simultaneously, including the area of the house directly above the hidden room discovered months earlier. The deputy, Calvin Mosley, stated in his 1948 affidavit, "It wasn't no accident, that fire. Sheriff had us douse the place in kerosene ourselves, starting in the attic where we found the widow and that hole she'd been digging. Said it was on the mayor's authority, and Dr. Fletcher was there overseeing the whole thing, making sure it burned hot enough in certain areas. After it was done, they had us remove something from the root cellar, a metal box about the size of a bread loaf, sealed with some kind of wax. They never told us what was in it, but the sheriff handled it like it might break, and Dr. Fletcher wouldn't even touch it with his bare hands. For 2 years, the story of Eleanor McAllister faded from public attention. She remained institutionalized in Lexington, her condition reportedly neither improving nor worsening. Then, in April 1913, an unexpected development occurred. According to asylum records, Eleanor McAllister received a visitor on April 10, 1913, Robert Langford, a reporter from the Louisville Courier-Journal working on a series about the state's judicial history. The meeting lasted approximately 1 hour. 3 days later, Langford was found dead in his hotel room in Lexington. The coroner ruled it a natural death, a heart attack in a man of 53 with no history of cardiac problems. What makes this incident particularly intriguing is that among Langford's effects was a notebook containing what appeared to be interview notes from his meeting with Eleanor McAllister. These notes, preserved in the newspaper's archives until they were transferred to the Kentucky Historical Society in 1957, contained several disturbing entries. Mrs. M. claims Judge kept separate records, cases that never happened. Says he built the house where it is for a reason. Old mine connects to something else underground. Asked about what drove her to tear apart the house. She said, the scratching, always at night, like fingernails on the inside of the walls, getting louder. He was trying to get out. Mrs. M. became agitated when discussing the judge's chambers at the courthouse, said he brought things home. Things from cases that disappeared, mentioned specific case from 1907, the Harlan mining accident. Claims the official report was all lies, but there was one entry that was partially obscured by what appeared to be a watermark or stain on the page. When examined under ultraviolet light by archivists in 1962, the previously illegible text was revealed. Mrs. M. says, Judge found something in mine years before explosion. Something not dead but not alive, as we understand it. Says he brought it home, studied it in secret lab beneath house. Says there were others. Says they could take different shapes. Says they're still in Harlan, looking like people we know. The reference to the Harlan mining accident is particularly significant. In October 1907, an explosion at the Black Mountain Coal Company mine resulted in the deaths of 27 miners. The subsequent investigation, overseen by Judge McAllister, concluded that the accident resulted from a buildup of methane gas ignited by a miner's lamp. The case was closed and compensation was paid to the families of the deceased. However, Langford's notes suggest that Eleanor McAllister believed there was more to the story. The final entry in his notebook reads, She says they weren't all dead when they sealed the mine, says the judge knew. Says she found his real report in a compartment beneath the study floor. Says the sounds she heard weren't just in the walls, they were coming up from below. From the old mine shaft that runs beneath the property. Says Judge was paid to keep something quiet, something they found in the deep shaft. Unfortunately, if Langford had discovered what that something might have been, he never had the chance to report it. And whatever documents Eleanor claimed to have found in the judge's hidden compartment were presumably destroyed in the fire that consumed the McAllister house. Or were they? According to a memo discovered in the files of Governor Augustus E. Wilson, dated March 20, 1911, just 3 days after the fire, certain materials had been removed from the McAllister property by state authorities prior to the blaze. The memo marked confidential, governor's eyes only, states, items retrieved from McAllister residence as per your instruction. Documents secure at specified location. Dr. Fletcher reports specimen remains viable despite age. Continued observation recommended. Judge's involvement appears more extensive than initially believed. Potential implications for Harlan. Situation troubling. What Harlan situation might the governor have been referring to? The historical record shows that in early 1911, Harlan County experienced a series of unusual incidents. The local newspaper reported several unexplained disappearances, primarily of individuals who lived near the abandoned mine workings. There were reports of livestock found dead with no apparent cause, and rumors of strange lights seen in the hills at night. Most disturbing was an epidemic of what was officially termed nervous exhaustion that affected nearly 24 residents over a period of 6 weeks. The afflicted individuals reported similar symptoms: insomnia, paranoia, and a persistent sensation of being watched. Several claimed to hear scratching sounds in their walls at night. Dr. Fletcher, who treated many of the cases, noted in his medical journal that the majority of those affected had attended Judge McAllister's funeral the previous year or had some connection to the court system during his tenure. By summer, the incidents had ceased, and life in Harlan returned to its normal rhythm. But according to county records during that period, an unusually high number of residents chose to leave the area permanently. The census of 1910 had recorded a population of 10,466 for Harlan County. By 1912, local tax records showed a drop to 10,187, a significant decrease at a time when most coal mining communities were experiencing growth. Eleanor McAllister died at the Eastern Kentucky Asylum on December 8, 1916. Her death certificate lists the cause as general physical decline secondary to persistent refusal of nourishment. According to asylum staff interviewed years later, in her final days, she would not sleep in her bed, instead sitting upright in a chair positioned in the center of her room, claiming that they can get you through the floor if you're not careful. A curious footnote to Eleanor's story emerged in 1937, when a former asylum orderly named James Henshaw published a small pamphlet titled "Strange Tales from the Asylum." In it, he claimed that Eleanor McAllister had not been as isolated during her confinement as official records suggested. According to Henshaw, the widow had a regular visitor, a man who came at night after official visiting hours. He would speak with her for exactly 1 hour, always keeping his face in shadow. The staff were instructed not to record these visits in the log. After each visit, Mrs. McAllister would become agitated, often repeating the phrase, "He's wearing the judge's face, but it's not him. It's not him." Henshaw's account was dismissed by asylum officials as the fabrication of a disgruntled former employee. The pamphlet was largely forgotten until 1958, when it came to the attention of Dr. Laura Mitchell, a psychiatrist researching the history of mental health treatment in Kentucky. Mitchell was struck by the specificity of Henshaw's description of Eleanor's visitor, particularly the detail that he always kept the right side of his face turned away from direct light. This detail corresponded with a peculiarity noted in Judge McAllister's autopsy report, an unusual marking or discoloration on the right side of his face that had appeared shortly before his death. The remains of the McAllister house stood abandoned until 1924, when the property was finally purchased by the First Presbyterian Church to expand their cemetery. During the clearing of the ruins, workers discovered something unusual, a sealed brick chamber beneath what had been the study. The chamber was empty except for a single wooden chair and evidence of a tunnel that had been deliberately collapsed. Church records indicate that Reverend Abernathy, still serving the congregation at that time, ordered the chamber filled in immediately and instructed the workers not to discuss their discovery. One worker, however, Samuel Cooper, later spoke of the incident to his son, who recorded the conversation in 1958 as part of a local history project for Harlan County High School. According to Cooper's account, there was writing on the walls of that little room. Not regular writing like you'd do with a pen. It looked like someone had used their fingernails or maybe a piece of metal. It said the same thing over and over. "The judge is not dead." And beneath the chair there was a hole, not very wide, but it seemed to go down forever. "We dropped a stone in and never heard it hit bottom." Cooper's account included another detail that was omitted from the official church record. The wooden chair found in the chamber bore unusual stains and restraint-like attachments, as if someone had been secured to it for some purpose. Most disturbing was Cooper's claim that when they moved the chair, they found a small metal tag embedded in the floor beneath it. The tag bore a number 1754 and the words Specimen A, Original Source. In 1962, when the Presbyterian Church expanded their fellowship hall, they excavated near the former McAllister property line. Construction was halted briefly when workers discovered a leather-bound book that appeared to have been buried in a metal box. The book was identified as Judge McAllister's Bench Journal from 1907. The church pastor at the time, Reverend Howard Matthews, examined the journal briefly before turning it over to the County Historical Society. In a letter to the Society dated May 17, 1962, Matthews wrote, "While most of the entries appear to be standard judicial notations, I was disturbed by repeated references to something the judge calls the specimen. There are also several pages that appear to contain encoded information, columns of numbers with no apparent meaning. Given the disturbing rumors that have persisted about the McAllister property, I believe this journal should be properly archived but not made available for general public access." The journal was indeed archived, and in 1967 it came to the attention of Professor Walter Simmons, a cryptographer at the University of Kentucky, who was researching historical codes used by the judiciary in the late 19th century. Simmons reportedly spent several months working on the coded sections of McAllister's journal. His findings were never formally published, but a colleague later claimed that Simmons had deciphered at least a portion of the code. According to this unnamed colleague, interviewed for an academic paper in 1969, Simmons discovered that Judge McAllister had been recording the details of an unofficial investigation into something found in the deepest shaft of the Black Mountain Mine in early 1907, months before the explosion. The coded entries apparently referred to specimens removed from a secondary chamber, discovered by miners who had broken through into what appeared to be a natural cave system. The last time I saw him, he showed me a partial translation that mentioned entities that were neither fully alive nor dead and responsive to electrical stimulation. He said the judge had been conducting experiments in a facility beneath his home, accessible through the old mining shaft that ran under the property. What Simmons allegedly found in the coded sections of the journal was a detailed account of how miners had discovered an unusual geological formation deep within the Black Mountain, a chamber lined with what appeared to be fossilized organic material unlike any known plant or animal species. The colleague stated, Walter became increasingly paranoid as he worked on the code. He was convinced someone had been in his office examining his notes. Within this chamber were several pod-like structures containing what Judge McAllister described as dormant organisms of indeterminate classification. The miners had removed one of these pods before the company management sealed the shaft. This pod had somehow come into the judge's possession. According to Simmons's translation, McAllister had kept the pod in a specially constructed chamber beneath his home, where he subjected it to various stimuli, including electrical current. His notes indicated that the organism inside had shown signs of activity, but remained contained within its pod-like enclosure. The judge had taken tissue samples and observed unusual properties, most notably an ability to mimic the cellular structure of other organic material with which it came in contact. Walter Simmons disappeared in November 1968. His vehicle was found abandoned near Cumberland Gap, but no trace of Simmons himself was ever discovered. The partial translations he claimed to have completed were not among his effects, and the university subsequently returned Judge McAllister's journal to the county archives. In 1969, the entire archive building suffered water damage during a flood, and many documents, including the journal, were reported destroyed. However, rumors persisted among county employees that certain sensitive materials, including the McAllister documents, had been removed from the archive long before the flood and placed in a restricted access facility under the direct control of federal authorities. These rumors gained credibility in 1968 when Margaret Hensley, a nurse who had worked at the Eastern Kentucky Asylum during Eleanor McAllister's confinement, came forward with an unusual claim. In a notarized statement provided to a Lexington attorney, Hensley stated that in 1915, Eleanor had been interviewed multiple times by men who identified themselves as federal agents. These interviews were conducted without the knowledge of the asylum's medical director and were not recorded in the official visitation logs. According to Hensley, Mrs. McAllister would be taken to the administration building late at night. I was instructed to sedate her afterward and to make no record of either the interviews or the sedation. On one occasion, I overheard part of the questioning. They were asking about the specimens and the judge's laboratory. Mrs. McAllister told them, "You'll never find them all. He distributed them. They're out in the world now, wearing the faces he gave them." Hensley's statement contained another disturbing claim, that during Eleanor McAllister's last days, she had drawn a series of diagrams that she insisted be buried with her. These diagrams purportedly showed the layout of chambers beneath the McAllister house and what appeared to be anatomical drawings of something not entirely human. According to Hensley, these papers were confiscated by the same federal agents who had been interviewing Eleanor. Hensley's statement was never published, and the attorney to whom it was given, James Morrison, died in an automobile accident 3 months later. The statement was discovered among his effects by his son, who placed it in a safety deposit box where it remained until 1968, when he finally decided to make it public after reading about Walter Simmons's disappearance. The final known reference to the McAllister case comes from an unusual source, the personal journal of Dr. Curtis Phillips, a physician who worked at the University of Kentucky Medical Center in the late 1960s. In an entry dated December 3, 1968, Phillips wrote, "Patient admitted today from Harlan County with unusual condition. Elderly man, 70s, found wandering near old mine entrance. Initially diagnosed as dementia case, but symptoms inconsistent. Patient has areas of skin that appear oddly grafted. Old surgical scars of unusual pattern. Claims to have been in the dark since 1907. Dental work appears consistent with early 1900s techniques. No identification, no matches in missing persons. Patient keeps repeating name McAllister and phrase, 'The judge said I could leave when the work was done.' Federal authorities notified per protocol." A subsequent entry dated December 5, 1968 adds, "Patient removed by federal authorities claiming jurisdiction under Public Health Service Act. No paperwork provided. Supervising physician advised that case is classified and all records to be surrendered." Unusual marking noted on right side of patient's face before removal. Appears similar to photograph of Judge Thomas McAllister. Located in Historical Society archives after patient mentioned the name repeatedly. Coincidence deeply troubling. There are no further entries regarding this patient, and Dr. Phillips's subsequent journals make no mention of the case. When interviewed in 1969 by a researcher interested in unusual medical cases, Phillips claimed to have no recollection of the patient described in his journal and suggested that the entry must have been some sort of creative writing exercise. The land where the McAllister house once stood is now covered by the expanded Presbyterian Cemetery. The area immediately surrounding the house's former foundation remains conspicuously vacant. No graves have been dug there, despite the cemetery's otherwise efficient use of space. A small unmarked stone pillar stands at what would have been the center of the house. Local residents avoid the area after dark. Groundskeepers report that even now, more than 100 years after Judge McAllister's death and Eleanor's descent into madness, strange sounds can sometimes be heard, like scratching beneath the earth, as if something were trying to dig its way up from below. In 1965, a geological survey team attempted to map the abandoned mine systems beneath Harlan County. Their report notes a curious anomaly. The shaft that once ran beneath the McAllister property appears to descend far deeper than any other mine in the region, extending below the natural coal seam to unknown depths. The team's attempt to explore this shaft was halted when their equipment registered unusual temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic disturbances that rendered their instruments unreliable. The team leader, Dr. Howard Marshall, requested permission to return with specialized equipment, but the request was denied by county officials. In his letter protesting this decision, Marshall wrote, "Whatever is at the bottom of that shaft, it is not consistent with the known geological features of the region. Something is down there, something that doesn't belong." Dr. Marshall's concerns might have been dismissed as scientific curiosity had it not been for an incident that occurred during the initial survey. According to a team member who spoke to the Lexington Herald-Leader in 1966, when they were measuring the depth of the shaft that ran beneath the former McAllister property, they lowered a weighted line nearly 2,000 feet, far deeper than any mine in the region should have extended. When they attempted to retrieve the line, they found it had been severed cleanly, as if cut with a sharp instrument. More disturbing was the discovery that the remaining portion of the line bore unusual markings. What appeared to be a series of precisely spaced notches that one team member, a former military cryptographer, identified as a simple binary code. When translated, the code spelled out a single word: waiting. The incident was not included in the team's official report, and when questioned about it later, Dr. Marshall denied any knowledge of such an occurrence. The team member who had spoken to the newspaper was subsequently transferred to a project in Alaska and could not be reached for further comment. In the county courthouse, in a rarely visited corner of the records room, there is a sealed box labeled simply McAllister, Restricted Access, 1967. No one currently employed by the county claims to have authorization to open it. The single clerk, who admitted to having seen the contents shortly before the box was sealed, would say only this: "Some doors should remain closed. Some things should stay buried." The judge knew that in the end, and so did his wife. Whatever is in that mine shaft, whatever came up from below, it's still down there, still waiting. That clerk, Martha Jenkins, retired in 1970 and lived quietly in Harlan until her death in 1982. In her will, she left a sealed envelope to be opened only in the event that unusual disturbances were reported at the Presbyterian Cemetery. The envelope remains intact in the office of a Lexington law firm, its contents unknown. To this day, the area around the former McAllister property remains undeveloped despite the expansion of Harlan in all other directions. Maps of the county's utility and sewer systems show a conspicuous void where service lines simply stop, creating a dark island in the otherwise thoroughly documented landscape. In 1973, during a particularly harsh winter, an incident occurred that briefly brought attention back to the old McAllister case. Joseph Daniels, the night watchman at the Presbyterian Church, reported hearing unusual sounds coming from the cemetery late one January night. In his statement to Sheriff Raymond Collins, Daniels described a rhythmic scratching or tapping, like something trying to signal from underground. Sheriff Collins, likely aware of the property's history, took the report seriously enough to visit the cemetery himself the following night. His official log contains a brief entry: investigated report of disturbance at Presbyterian Cemetery. No evidence of vandalism or trespassing. No unusual sounds detected. Case closed. But a personal letter to his brother, discovered among family papers in 1998, tells a different story. Something strange is happening at that old McAllister place. I heard it myself, like someone tapping in code. Reminded me of how we used to communicate between our rooms as boys. The sound was coming from that unmarked pillar where the house foundation used to be. I put my ear to the stone and could have sworn I heard whispering beneath the tapping. The words weren't clear, but the tone was urgent. I've told Reverend Preston to keep the cemetery locked at night for the time being. The church records show that the cemetery remained closed after dark for the next 6 months. An unusual policy that was explained to the congregation as a precaution against vandalism. But former church secretary Ida Mae Collins, no relation to the sheriff, later revealed that during that period, Reverend Preston had conducted what he termed special prayer services at the site of the unmarked pillar every Wednesday night, attended only by himself and 2 senior deacons. In 1975, a graduate student in folklore from the University of Kentucky named Thomas Lawrence visited Harlan to collect local legends for his thesis. His recorded interviews with several elderly residents included references to the McAllister case, though most were reluctant to discuss it in detail. One interview with 93-year-old former coal miner William Hobbs contained a particularly intriguing statement. The judge wasn't just studying that thing they found. He was trying to communicate with it. That's what nobody understood. He thought it was intelligent, thought it could teach us things. But it wasn't teaching, it was learning about us, how we're made, how we think. The explosion wasn't no accident. It was trying to get back to where the others were, deep in that shaft. And after the judge died, it wanted to go home. When Lawrence asked how Hobbs knew these details, the old man replied, "I was there. I was one of the miners who found that chamber. 3 of us went down that day. The other 2 never came back up, not really. Their bodies came up, but they weren't in 'em anymore. The company said it was coal gas that got them, made them act strange. But I knew better. I saw what was in that chamber before we broke through. I saw what moved in the dark." Hobbs died 2 weeks after the interview from what was officially listed as natural causes. Lawrence's thesis was never completed. University records indicate he took a leave of absence in late 1975 and never returned to his studies. His current whereabouts are unknown. In 1980, the Presbyterian Church underwent significant renovations, including the installation of a new heating system that required excavation near the old McAllister property line. Workers reported discovering an unusual concrete structure approximately 4 feet below ground level, a tunnel or conduit that appeared to run in the direction of the abandoned mine entrance. Church officials immediately ordered the excavation filled and the heating system redesigned to avoid the area. One worker, who requested anonymity when interviewed by the Harlan Daily Enterprise, claimed they had broken through into the concrete structure and found what appeared to be an old electrical conduit of unusual design. "It wasn't like any wiring I've ever seen," he stated. "The cables were thick, with some kind of insulation I didn't recognize, and there was a smell, like ozone after a lightning strike, but stronger, made my skin crawl. Reverend Preston had us fill it with concrete same day, said it was an old utility line that might still have current." The same year, a series of minor earthquakes was reported in the area around Harlan. Geological survey teams attributed the seismic activity to settling in the abandoned mine workings, but local residents noted that the epicenters seemed clustered around the former McAllister property. Several residents near the Presbyterian Cemetery reported hearing a low humming sound coming from the direction of the old house site just before each tremor. In 1982, an unusual legal case brought renewed attention to the McAllister story. A man claiming to be Thomas McAllister III, the judge's great-nephew, filed a petition to have Eleanor McAllister's remains exhumed and reinterred in the family plot in Lexington. The petition was accompanied by documentation purporting to show that the judge had left specific instructions for his wife to be buried beside him, regardless of the circumstances of her death. County records showed no previous indication that the judge had any living relatives, and research by the court revealed that Thomas McAllister III's documentation contained several historical inconsistencies. The petition was denied, but the incident prompted a review of Eleanor McAllister's asylum records, which had been sealed since her death. The reviewing judge, after examining the records in private chambers, ordered them resealed for another 50 years. No explanation was given for this decision, but courthouse employees reported that the judge appeared visibly shaken after reading the files and requested an immediate meeting with federal authorities. Thomas McAllister III disappeared from Harlan County the day after his petition was denied. Investigations revealed that the address he had provided in Lexington did not exist, and the legal firm he claimed to represent had no record of him or the case. His photograph, taken for court records, was later shown to several elderly residents who had known the original Judge McAllister. Three independently stated that the resemblance to the judge in his younger years was uncanny. In 1987, a book titled The Secret History of Harlan County was published by a small press specializing in regional histories. The author, listed as anonymous, devoted a chapter to the McAllister case, drawing connections between the judge's activities and several other unusual incidents in the county's history. Most notably, the author suggested that the 1907 mine explosion had been deliberately triggered to seal the deep shaft after something escaped from the chamber discovered by the miners. The book sold poorly and quickly went out of print, but copies became sought-after collector's items among enthusiasts of Appalachian folklore. In 1992, a fire at the publisher's warehouse destroyed all remaining inventory and the original manuscript. The publisher subsequently went out of business, and no second printing was ever produced. In 1995, during the digitization of county records, several documents related to the McAllister case were discovered to be missing from the archives. The county clerk at the time, Robert Jenkins, son of Martha Jenkins, who had seen the contents of the sealed box years earlier, conducted an internal investigation but was unable to determine when or how the documents had been removed. In his report to the county commissioners, he noted, "The missing files appear to have been selectively removed by someone with knowledge of our filing system and specific interest in the McAllister case. The removal must have occurred prior to 1990, as inventory records from that year already show the discrepancy, though it wasn't flagged at the time." One of the missing documents, as listed in the original archive index, was a report from Dr. Ort Fletcher, dated November 9, 1910, regarding the analysis of biological specimen recovered from McAllister property. Another was a deposition from Eleanor McAllister taken shortly after her committal to the asylum, described in the index as sealed by judicial order, restricted access, contains sensitive information regarding public safety. In 1998, renovation work at the Eastern Kentucky Asylum, by then renamed Eastern State Hospital, uncovered a hidden compartment in what had been the director's office during Eleanor McAllister's confinement. The compartment contained a small wooden box with the initials E.M. carved into the lid. Inside was a journal, apparently kept by Eleanor during her early months at the asylum, and a small glass vial containing what appeared to be a soil sample. Hospital administrators turned both items over to state authorities, citing protocols for handling potentially historically significant artifacts. Neither the journal nor the vial has been made available for public examination, but a hospital employee who claimed to have seen the journal before it was confiscated described it as containing page after page of the same phrase, written in increasingly erratic handwriting. "It wears his face, but it's not him." In 2002, Dr. Rebecca Sullivan, a geologist specializing in unusual formations, attempted to conduct a ground-penetrating radar survey of the area around the former McAllister property as part of a broader study of subterranean anomalies in eastern Kentucky. Her request for access was initially approved by church officials, but later rescinded without explanation. When she attempted to conduct the survey from adjacent property, her equipment reportedly malfunctioned in a manner she described as consistent with strong electromagnetic interference. In a paper published in the Journal of Appalachian Geology, Sullivan noted, "The subsoil composition in the target area displays unusual characteristics that cannot be fully explained by known geological processes. Of particular interest is a cylindrical formation extending vertically from approximately 10 feet below surface level to an undetermined depth. Attempts to map this formation were hampered by equipment failures and what appears to be deliberate obstruction by local authorities." Sullivan's academic career was cut short by an accident later that year. She suffered severe injuries in a laboratory fire that claimed the lives of 2 of her research assistants. The cause of the fire was officially attributed to a gas leak, though subsequent investigations found no evidence of such a leak. Sullivan retired from active research following her recovery and has declined all requests for interviews regarding her work in Harlan County. In 2005, an unusual legal case brought the McAllister story back into public view. The Presbyterian Church filed a petition to have the small stone pillar marking the center of the former McAllister house removed, citing plans to expand the cemetery into that previously unused area. The petition was opposed by a previously unknown organization called the Harlan Historical Preservation Society, which claimed the pillar was a historically significant marker that should remain undisturbed. Court records show that the Historical Preservation Society was represented by a Lexington law firm with connections to federal agencies, though the exact nature of these connections was never clearly established. The case dragged on for nearly 2 years before being settled out of court. The terms of the settlement were sealed, but the pillar remained in place, and the church abandoned its plans to use that section of the property for burials. During the legal proceedings, several documents were entered into evidence regarding the historical significance of the McAllister property. One, a letter from Governor Wilson to Sheriff McKinney, dated March 1911, contained a passage that raised new questions about the case. The matter we discussed regarding the McAllister situation must remain absolutely confidential. The specimens have been secured and transferred to the facility we discussed. Dr. Fletcher assures me that there is no further risk of contamination from the primary site, but monitoring must continue as agreed. Under no circumstances should the nature of what was found beneath the property be disclosed to the general public. The official record will show only that a fire of unknown origin destroyed the house and that no investigation was deemed necessary. In 2010, exactly 100 years after Eleanor McAllister's removal from her home, a series of unusual incidents occurred in Harlan County. 6 residents living near the Presbyterian Cemetery reported hearing what they described as tapping sounds coming from the direction of the stone pillar, always between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m. A local paranormal investigation team requested permission to monitor the site, but was denied access by church officials. More troubling were reports from cemetery employees about disturbances to the grounds near the pillar. On 3 separate occasions, caretakers arrived in the morning to find what appeared to be excavation attempts, small, precisely dug holes approximately 6 inches in diameter and extending several feet into the earth. Motion-activated security cameras installed after the second incident failed to capture any human activity in the area, yet a third hole appeared while the cameras were operational. In 2012, an elderly man was found wandering near the abandoned mine entrance that had once connected to the McAllister property. He carried no identification and appeared disoriented, repeatedly asking what year it was and stating that he had been down below for a long time. When taken to the local hospital for evaluation, he was found to have unusual scarring on his hands and forearms, consistent with old electrical burns. Hospital records show that before he could be fully examined, the man was removed from the facility by federal agents who presented documentation identifying him as a missing person from another state. The hospital administrator later reported that the documentation appeared to be in order, but she had been disturbed by the man's parting words as he was escorted out. The judge keeps his promises. He said I could come up when the work was done, and the work is done now. They're ready. In 2015, construction workers expanding the Harlan County Records Building discovered a sealed room in the basement that did not appear on any of the original blueprints. The room contained a single filing cabinet marked with the McAllister name and a date range, 1903-1910. County officials immediately secured the area and contacted state authorities who removed the cabinet and its contents before they could be examined by local historians. A maintenance worker present during the removal later claimed that one of the federal agents had dropped a folder while transferring files to a secure container, briefly exposing its contents. The worker described seeing what appeared to be a photograph of a large chamber lined with unusual pod-like formations and a handwritten label that read, "Primary Incubation Chamber, 1754 specimens documented before collapse triggered." In 2017, a university research team conducting a water quality survey of local aquifers reported unusual findings in samples taken near the old mine entrance. According to their published results, the water contained trace amounts of organic compounds that could not be identified through standard analysis. More concerning was the presence of microscopic structures that one researcher described as similar to cellular material but with a completely unfamiliar structure. The team's requests for additional funding to investigate these findings were denied, and the primary researcher subsequently accepted a position with a private laboratory operating under government contract. The project was officially terminated, and no follow-up studies have been conducted. In recent years, local residents have reported an increase in unusual phenomena around the area of the Presbyterian Cemetery. Electronic devices malfunction with unusual frequency near the stone pillar. Several visitors have reported experiencing a sensation of being watched while in the vicinity. Most disturbing are accounts of voices heard near the pillar, not clearly audible speech, but what witnesses describe as whispers just below the threshold of comprehension. The current cemetery caretaker, who requested anonymity when interviewed for this account, stated that the ground around the pillar sometimes feels different, warmer than the surrounding earth, even in winter, with a subtle vibration like something humming deep underground. In a final, perhaps most, disturbing development, 3 separate visitors to the cemetery in the past year have reported seeing a figure standing near the pillar in the early evening hours. A tall, slender man in outdated formal attire, always positioned with the right side of his face turned away from the observer. When approached, the figure reportedly walks toward the tree line at the property's edge and disappears from view. One witness, a local historian with knowledge of the McAllister case, claimed that the figure bore a striking resemblance to photographs she had seen of Judge Thomas McAllister. When asked how this could be possible, given that the judge had been dead for over a century, she replied, "Who says it's him?" Eleanor kept saying, "It wears his face, but it's not him." Maybe she knew something we still don't understand. Maybe what came out of that mine is still here, still watching, still waiting for something. And maybe it's not alone. The sealed box in the county records room remains untouched, its contents known only to those with clearance to access them. The stone pillar still stands at the center of what was once the McAllister house, unmarked and unremarkable to those unaware of its significance. And the old mine entrance, though officially sealed decades ago, still draws occasional visitors, some curious, some drawn by inexplicable compulsion. Local legend holds that if you stand near that sealed entrance at night, when the wind is still and the modern world falls quiet, you can sometimes hear it, a faint rhythmic sound coming from deep within the earth. Not random settling or the movement of groundwater, but deliberate, purposeful, a tapping that almost forms a pattern, like a code or a signal, a message from below. And in Harlan County, they've learned to live with the scratching. They've learned not to dig too deep, literally or figuratively. They've learned that some questions are better left unasked, and some doors, like the one to that sealed room in the records building, like the entrance to that abandoned mine, like the passage that once led from the McAllister's root cellar to whatever lay beneath, are better left closed. Because what Judge Thomas McAllister found in that deep shaft in 1907, what Eleanor discovered after his death, what drove her to tear apart their home in search of answers, these things remain hidden in sealed files and buried memories. But perhaps not for much longer. As one elderly resident put it when asked about the McAllister case, the judge thought he could control what came out of that mine, thought he could study it, use it for his own purposes. But it was using him all along, and now after all this time, I think it's finally ready for whatever it's been planning. The scratching is getting louder, the tapping is getting faster, and sooner or later, something's going to answer from the other side. The stone pillar stands, the earth beneath it waits, and in the darkness below Harlan County, something listens, something remembers, something remains. And perhaps, as Eleanor McAllister knew in those final terrible moments of lucidity before madness claimed her completely, it was never truly contained at all.